The old sheep began staring at the abandoned well 2 mornings after little Rose Bennett disappeared. She did not graze with the rest of the flock. She did not follow the feed bucket when Farmer Daniel Mercer called. Instead, the gray-faced ewe climbed the slope behind the orchard, stopped beside the ring of broken stones half buried in weeds, and stood there for hours with her cloudy eyes fixed on the mud around the base. Daniel tried driving her back twice. Each time she returned before dusk and resumed staring, occasionally scraping the earth with one front hoof as if something beneath it offended her. By the third morning, after a night of heavy rain, Daniel walked up the hill to drag her away again, and finally saw what had changed. Caught in the fresh mud near the well lay a thin silver chain with a tiny gold heart hanging from it. The clasp was broken. Daniel bent down, washed the mud away with rainwater from a nearby rock, and felt his stomach tighten. He recognized the necklace immediately. It belonged to 7-year-old Rose Bennett, the child who had vanished from the neighboring farm 3 days earlier while her mother was hanging laundry in the yard. Everyone in Willow Creek believed Rose wandered into the woods or was taken by the swollen river after the storm. But the necklace had not come from the river. It had surfaced beside a sealed well at the top of Daniel's Hill, far from the search area and far from any place a child would go alone. Before we begin, please subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and write in the comments. Would you trust an old animal's strange behavior if it led you to the first clue in a missing child case? Daniel Mercer had lived on Mercer Hollow Farm in southern Tennessee for nearly 30 years. At 53, he was a broad-shouldered man with rough hands, a tired back, and the quiet endurance of someone who had spent most of his life repairing what weather and debt tried to break. His wife, Elaine, had died of cancer 6 winters earlier, and since then Daniel kept mostly to himself, speaking more often to sheep, cattle, and his old sheepdog Moss than to other adults. The ewe who stared at the well was named Agnes. She was at least 14, nearly toothless, half blind in one eye, and too old to be worth anything at market. Daniel kept her alive because she had once raised 3 rejected lambs on her own, and because Elaine used to say old creatures deserved the dignity of being allowed to finish their days where they were known. Agnes usually moved slowly and cared only for clover, shade, and her own comfort. Seeing her fixate on the abandoned well unsettled Daniel more than he wanted to admit. The well itself had a history no one liked discussing. It sat beyond the upper orchard, behind a collapsed stone wall, on land that belonged to Daniel's grandfather before the property lines shifted. It had been sealed 40 years earlier after a farmhand fell partway inside when the old cover gave way. He survived, but afterward everyone avoided the place. The shaft had supposedly dried out, and Daniel's father covered it with iron mesh and heavy boards before piling stones around the rim. Children were warned to stay away, not because of ghost stories, though the town had plenty, but because rotting wood and deep holes made simple tragedies. Rose Bennett knew that warning. She was not a reckless child. She was small for 7, with straight dark hair, wide brown eyes, and a habit of asking careful questions before touching anything. Her mother, Laura Bennett, rented the old Kearney farm on the other side of the creek after leaving an abusive marriage in Kentucky. Daniel had known them for only 11 months, but Rose had become a familiar part of his days. She liked feeding carrots to his donkey, collecting oddly shaped stones, and sitting beside Agnes because the ewe never tried taking papers from her hands while she drew. The silver necklace had belonged to Rose's grandmother. Laura said Rose wore it only on special days at first, then every day after the grandmother died. It was the one item Rose had insisted on taking even when Laura sold half their belongings to move to Willow Creek. 3 days earlier, Laura was hanging sheets behind the farmhouse while Rose played nearby with chalk and a red rubber ball. A delivery truck from Hollow Creek Farm Supply arrived around noon with chicken feed Laura had ordered. The driver, a quiet man named Wayne Foster, left after 15 minutes. At 12:40, Laura looked up and saw the ball near the fence, but no sign of Rose. She called her name, checked the house, the barn, the creek bank, and the road. By 1 o'clock, she was screaming for neighbors. Deputies came. Search teams spread through the woods. Dogs found Rose's scent near the road, then lost it where tire tracks mixed with the gravel. Deputy Sheriff Calvin Ross decided almost immediately that Rose wandered toward the creek, though no one found footprints, clothing, or any sign of a fall. By sunset, half the county searched the water and the low forest. Daniel searched too, all night and most of the next day. Laura moved through the crowd like a woman refusing to wake from a nightmare. Her ex-husband, Travis Bennett, arrived by evening claiming he came as soon as he heard. Daniel disliked him at once. Travis was 36, broad, handsome in the careless way of men who have long relied on charm before temper, and far too quick to speak for Laura whenever deputies asked questions. Laura later admitted Travis had been threatening to take Rose because she filed for sole custody and reported his violence. Deputy Ross dismissed those threats as domestic upset and told Laura not to turn the search into a custody war. Daniel remembered that sentence when he held Rose's necklace in his hand beside the well. He put Agnes back behind the gate, then drove straight to Laura's farm. She opened the door pale and exhausted, with Travis standing behind her in the kitchen as if he belonged there. When Daniel showed her the necklace, Laura covered her mouth and started crying before she even touched it. "I fastened it that morning," she whispered. "She had it on." Travis said maybe searchers dropped it by mistake. Daniel answered without looking at him. "Searchers haven't been on my upper hill, and Agnes found it before I did." Laura insisted on telling Sheriff Elena Brooks, not Deputy Ross. Elena, a county sheriff from the neighboring jurisdiction, temporarily assisting because Willow Creek lacked enough manpower, came out herself within the hour. She was 45, practical, sharp-eyed, and one of the few officials Daniel trusted to listen before deciding. She examined the necklace, the mud, the disturbed ground around the well, and Agnes's hoof marks. Then she noticed something Daniel had missed. Fresh wagon grass had been flattened near the stone wall, and beneath the wet leaves lay a child's pink plastic hair clip. Rose wore 2 clips that morning. Laura confirmed it immediately. Elena ordered the site sealed. Ross objected when he arrived, claiming the well was irrelevant and the evidence likely carried by animals. Elena crouched near the mud and lifted a piece of torn black plastic embedded near the rim. "Animals don't usually drag pieces of duct tape and children's jewelry to sealed wells," she said. Ross's expression hardened for half a second before smoothing again. That was the first moment Daniel truly believed one of the lawmen might be part of whatever happened. The well cover could not be lifted by hand because someone had recently reinforced it with new boards and a rusted metal brace held shut by wire. Daniel swore it had not looked that way a month earlier. Fire rescue crews pried it open while everyone waited in the rain. The shaft was only 12 feet deep before narrowing into a side chamber, used decades ago to store root vegetables when the water level fell. It was dry now. At the bottom, searchers found an old wool blanket, an empty juice box, and a child's drawing torn across one corner. The drawing showed a sheep with a crooked face, a little girl in a yellow shirt, and a round dark hole beside an apple tree. Rose had drawn Agnes in the well, but Rose was not there. Instead, in the back of the chamber, Elena found something much worse. A recent scrape mark along the stone wall where a hidden wooden panel had been slid aside. Behind it lay a narrow crawl tunnel leading downhill beneath the old orchard. Someone had used the abandoned well as an entrance to move in and out unseen. The tunnel had footprints in drying mud, one adult, one child, and a set of boot prints over both, as if someone deliberately walked back through to blur the trail. It opened 300 yards lower on the property behind an abandoned cider shed near the county road. There, tucked behind brambles, Elena found deep tire ruts from a vehicle with a damaged rear tread. Daniel recognized the pattern instantly. Hollow Creek Farm Supply's old blue delivery truck had that same missing tread segment on the left rear tire. Wayne Foster drove that truck. Wayne Foster had been the last outsider Laura saw near Rose before she vanished. But Laura shook her head when Elena suggested he might be involved. Wayne was 58, shy, and known for fixing broken gates for elderly customers without charging. He sometimes brought Rose stale peppermint candies from the supply counter. "Not him," Laura said. "He would never." Elena did not answer. She simply had deputies find him. Wayne's truck was discovered an hour later behind the supply warehouse, recently washed despite the mud everywhere else in town. He himself was missing. At his small trailer outside Hollow Creek, officers found the place ransacked. Drawers were dumped on the floor, his telephone smashed, and blood on the sink. That changed the shape of the case again. Wayne had not necessarily taken Rose. He might have seen something, Or he might have been useful to someone who needed a familiar truck and a known face to avoid suspicion. Agnes returned to the well that evening and would not move even when Daniel brought her grain. Elena asked if the ewe had ever behaved like that before. Daniel said no. Laura, standing nearby, whispered, "Rose used to sit there with her. She read stories aloud." That detail mattered more than it seemed. Agnes was not only reacting to the well, she was reacting to Rose's scent, to fear, perhaps to the repeated movement around a place the child knew. It did not make the sheep magical. It made her familiar enough with the ordinary to sense what was no longer ordinary. As investigators traced the tire impressions, Laura finally told Elena about the rest of Travis's behavior. He had shown up at her house 2 days before Rose vanished and demanded they move back with him. When Laura refused, he said if he couldn't have his family, no one would. Ross had taken that statement when she first made it months earlier and filed nothing. Elena dug deeper and learned Ross and Travis's cousin were business partners in a hunting lease company. Travis had an alibi for the time of the disappearance. He was supposedly at a car repair garage 20 miles away. But the owner of that garage later admitted Ross pressured him to support the story. Meanwhile, state investigators checked financial records connected to farm supply because the delivery truck's presence now mattered. The company belonged to Charles Kearney, the same wealthy landowner who still held mortgage liens over Laura's rented farm and much of the surrounding valley. Kearney had been pressuring small tenants to leave so he could sell a large parcel to a bottling company. Laura had recently refused his offer to break her lease early because Rose finally felt safe in Willow Creek and Laura had nowhere else to go. Daniel did not like where the facts were pointing. A violent ex-husband with custody threats, a compromised deputy, a powerful landowner, a missing delivery driver, and a child hidden temporarily in a well tunnel on Daniel's property. That night, Elena brought in state police and took the case out of Ross's hands entirely. By dawn, a hiker found Wayne Foster alive, but barely conscious in a drainage ditch 8 miles south. He had been beaten, drugged, and left for dead. Once awake in the hospital, Wayne described what happened. After delivering feed to Laura, he drove toward town but was flagged down on Miller Road by Travis Bennett, who said his truck had broken down. When Wayne stopped, Travis climbed in, put a gun to his side, and ordered him toward an empty equipment barn on Kearney land. There, Deputy Ross and Charles Kearney were waiting. Rose was in the barn, frightened but alive. Ross said they needed Wayne's truck and route schedule because no one would question a delivery vehicle near Laura's house or the county back roads. When Wayne protested, Travis struck him. Wayne saw Rose taken through the orchard tunnel toward the well and later loaded into another vehicle after dark. He did not know where they took her next. He heard Kearney say only one thing clearly: if the mother signs, the girl goes back. Laura had received no ransom note, but 2 hours after Wayne's statement, one finally arrived by text from an unregistered phone. It contained a photograph of Rose sitting on a mattress, eyes red from crying, but visibly unharmed, holding that day's local newspaper. The message read, "Sign the lease termination and leave the county. No police. Child returned after dark." Elena almost laughed in anger when she read it. "They're not taking her for money," she said. "They're using her to clear the land." Laura explained what Kearney wanted. Her farmhouse stood on a tract the bottling company needed for road access and groundwater rights. Laura's lease protected that tract for another 5 years. Kearney could not sell cleanly unless she left or appeared unstable enough to be evicted. Taking Rose would force a desperate mother to sign anything. Travis, furious over custody and drowning in gambling debt, had joined willingly. Ross protected the scheme. Kearney financed it. But none of that brought Rose back. Elena arranged for Laura to appear cooperative and text that she would sign if she saw proof Rose was still alive that evening. The reply directed Laura to deliver signed papers to the old Stabler house, a deserted property near the quarry road, once owned by Kearney's family. Elena guessed they would use it as a transfer site, not the final holding place. She put the house under surveillance. Daniel insisted on helping because he knew the back roads and because Rose trusted him. Elena resisted, then relented on the condition that he stay with the outer team. As officers watched the Stabler house through approaching dusk, Agnes did something no one expected. She broke through a weak section of fence on Daniel's farm and wandered off downhill alone. Moss barked until Daniel noticed. He was furious at first. The old ewe had chosen the worst possible night to disappear. But when he found her trail, it led not back toward the well, but across the orchard lane and toward the overgrown cattle path connecting his land to the quarry ridge behind Stabler House. Daniel told Elena, who at first dismissed it as coincidence. Then she remembered the tunnel running downhill from the well toward the road. If they moved Rose once using hidden routes, she said, they may use another. Daniel followed Agnes on foot while relaying coordinates by radio. The ewe moved surprisingly steadily for her age, stopping only once to bleat toward a dense line of cedars. There Daniel found a narrow ATV track he had forgotten existed, recently reopened through the brush. Tire marks matched a small utility vehicle, not a full-size truck. It led away from Stabler House, not to it. Elena redirected half the team. The track ended at an old storm cellar behind a ruined tobacco barn on Kearney's far ridge. A generator hummed inside. Rose's voice drifted faintly through the door just as Travis Bennett came out carrying a duffel bag. He froze when he saw Daniel standing there and reached for the pistol at his waist. Daniel tackled him before he could raise it. State troopers rushed in seconds later. Rose was inside, alive, wrapped in a coat too large for her, with her hands tied but otherwise unharmed except for bruises on one wrist and the deep exhaustion of a child who had spent days afraid. She began sobbing when she saw Daniel. "Agnes came?" was the first thing she asked after Elena cut the ropes. Daniel nodded. "Agnes came." Travis was arrested on the spot, under pressure, and terrified Kearney would leave him to take all the blame. He began talking before midnight. Ross and Kearney had planned to move Rose again once Laura signed the termination papers, then release her far enough away to make it seem like she wandered off. But after the tunnel and well were discovered, they panicked. Kearney wanted to transfer Rose to an old hunting cabin across state lines until the land deal closed. Ross was on his way there with forged papers saying Laura voluntarily placed Rose with relatives because of a mental breakdown. Elena used that statement to obtain immediate warrants. Kearney was caught trying to leave his office with cash, a burner phone, and unsigned versions of the same lease termination document. Ross attempted to destroy files at the deputy substation, but was arrested by state investigators before he got through the first box. The evidence that followed revealed a broader conspiracy. Kearney had used falsified code violations, pressured deputies, and manipulated leases to clear lower-income tenants from land wanted by the bottling company. Ross had buried domestic violence reports, ignored missing person threats, and intimidated witnesses. Travis served as the perfect desperate weapon, violent, entitled, and convinced Rose belonged to him as much as Laura did. They chose the old well and tunnel because Kearney's father once stored moonshine through the orchard roots, and only a handful of old locals still remembered the hidden passages. Daniel became an unplanned obstacle because Rose knew his land and because Agnes noticed what adults overlooked. Rose's own account completed the human side of the story. She recognized Travis's voice the moment he grabbed her near the laundry line. He told her they were going to see her father, but Rose bit him and screamed, so Ross covered her mouth and carried her to the feed truck, waiting beyond the hedge. At the orchard tunnel, she dropped one hair clip on purpose because she had learned from library books that lost things could be clues. In the well chamber, she drew the sheep in the dark hole because Agnes's distant bleating was the only sound that made her feel less alone. Later, when Kearney moved her to the storm cellar, he complained that useless old sheep kept standing where she shouldn't. Rose realized Agnes had been waiting at the well above her. She told Daniel this days later while sitting in his kitchen, wrapped in one of Elaine's old quilts. "I knew if Agnes stayed there, you would look," she said. That sentence broke him more than any courtroom testimony ever did. Laura and Rose moved into a small house closer to town after the arrests, not because they wanted to leave Willow Creek, but because too many memories clung to the rented farm. Still, Rose visited Mercer Hollow often. She brought apples for Agnes, who accepted them with her usual ungrateful expression. Elena made sure the county brought outside review to every case Ross had touched. Other families came forward. A widow admitted Ross threatened her with child welfare reports unless she sold 2 acres to Kearney. An elderly couple revealed their well inspection had been falsified after they refused an access easement. The bottling company withdrew from the deal the moment the scandal went public. Kearney and Ross were eventually convicted on kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, extortion, and obstruction charges. Travis received the longest sentence after the court heard evidence of prior abuse in Rose's abduction. The old storm cellar was demolished. The tunnel from the well to the road was sealed with concrete, but Daniel refused to destroy the well entirely. Instead, once the case ended, he rebuilt the rim safely, installed a locked iron grate, and placed a small bench beneath the nearest apple tree. Rose sometimes sat there with a notebook, writing or drawing while Agnes grazed a few yards away, as if she had never done anything extraordinary. Daniel understood that better than most. Agnes had not solved a crime in the way people like to romanticize later. She had not understood land fraud, custody threats, forged paperwork, or why men would hide a child beneath the ground. She knew only that Rose's scent, fear, and repeated presence clung to the place. She knew something was wrong there, and unlike the humans who searched where they expected to find answers, Agnes kept returning to where the truth actually touched the earth. Years later, when Agnes died quietly in the winter pasture at nearly 15, Daniel buried her above the orchard hill, within sight of the old well and the bench. Rose, older now and no longer afraid of the dark in the same way, placed the silver necklace on the grave for 1 hour before taking it back and fastening it around her own neck again. She told Daniel she wanted to keep wearing it because Agnes had brought it home first. Visitors to Mercer Hollow sometimes heard the shorter version of the story. An old sheep stared at an abandoned well until a farmer found a missing child's necklace in the mud. But those who knew the full truth understood something deeper. The clue mattered because Daniel chose not to dismiss odd behavior. The rescue happened because Elena listened where Ross lied. Rose survived because she stayed brave enough to leave small signs inside terror. And the sheep? The sheep simply refused to abandon the place where a child she loved had been hidden. Sometimes that refusal is enough to begin pulling the truth into daylight.